The woman stood near the back of the long hallway, holding a worn folder against her chest. The building was old but grand, with tall windows that let in pale morning light. The floor echoed with footsteps, heels clicking, shoes tapping, nervous pacing everywhere. This was the National Piano Audition, a place where dreams were tested and many were quietly broken. Everyone here knew it mattered. She looked around, not staring for long, just quick glances. Most people were younger. Many wore pressed suits or elegant dresses. Some warmed their fingers on invisible keys. Others whispered last-minute notes to themselves. A few laughed loudly, trying to hide their fear. The woman stayed quiet. She had learned long ago that silence was safer. Her clothes were simple. A plain blouse, a faded skirt, flat shoes that had seen many years. Her hair was tied back neatly, not styled, just practical. Nothing about her drew attention, and that was exactly what happened. People looked past her as if she were part of the wall. When someone did notice her, their eyes slid away quickly, confused, maybe judgmental. She had arrived early, as she always did. Old habits stayed strong. Being early meant she could breathe, could prepare her mind. She found a seat near the wall and sat straight, placing the folder on her lap. Inside were old sheet papers, edges soft from years of use. Some pages had notes written in pencil, faded but meaningful. This audition had taken her months to decide on. The form alone had sat on her small kitchen table for weeks. Many nights she had walked past it, telling herself it was foolish. She had responsibilities, bills, a job that barely paid enough, a life that did not leave room for dreams. Still, the music never left her. It lived in her hands, her memory, her quiet moments. Round her, conversations floated in the air. Someone spoke proudly about a famous teacher. Another bragged about winning competitions overseas. A group laughed about how easy the first round would be. Their voices carried confidence, sometimes arrogance. The woman listened without reacting. She had heard it all before, just not in places like this. A staff member walked down the hall, calling out numbers and instructions. People lined up, checking their paperwork again and again. When the woman handed over her form, the staff member paused for half a second, then continued without comment. That pause did not go unnoticed. She felt it, like a tiny sting, but her face stayed calm. She returned to her seat and closed her eyes for a moment. In her mind, she was no longer in the hallway. She was somewhere else, somewhere familiar. A small room, a piano with chipped keys. Late nights after long workdays, music played softly so it would not disturb neighbors. Years of practice done in quiet, unseen. Not everyone practiced in bright halls with applause waiting. Some practiced in silence, with no promise that anyone would ever listen. A few seats away, two young contestants whispered and glanced in her direction. One of them raised an eyebrow, barely hiding a smile. The other leaned closer and said something she could not hear, but she understood the look. She had seen that look many times in her life. It was the look that said, "She doesn't belong here." She adjusted her grip on the folder. Her hands were steady, though her heart beat faster. She reminded herself why she came. Not to prove anything to them, not to impress. She came because music had been her companion through loss, through hard years, through moments when the world felt too heavy. Playing was the only place she felt fully herself. The doors to the audition hall opened briefly as one contestant finished. Applause followed, polite and measured. The judges' voices drifted out, calm and professional. The door closed again, sealing the sound inside. Those waiting shifted in their seats. As time passed, the hallway grew more tense. Some people stretched their fingers. Others stared at their phones, pretending not to care. One young man paced back and forth, stopping only when a friend whispered encouragement. The woman remained still. Movement used energy she preferred to save. She watched the light change on the floor as clouds passed outside. Each minute felt long, yet somehow too fast. Her turn would come whether she was ready or not. A memory surfaced, uninvited. A long time ago, another room, another piano. She had been younger then, hopeful. Someone had laughed that day too, said she was wasting her time, said music was for people with the right background, the right look, the right life. She remembered going home and not touching the piano for months after that. Life moved on. Work came, responsibilities piled up, dreams were pushed into corners. But the music waited. It always waited. Her number was closer now. She could hear it when the staff member called the next contestant. Her chest tightened, but she welcomed the feeling. Fear meant this still mattered. A woman across the hall dropped her sheet music, pages scattering. People helped gather them, offering smiles and kind words. The plain woman watched quietly. She had learned not to expect help, but she did not resent those who received it. Another contestant walked out of the hall, face pale, eyes unfocused. Friends rushed to comfort them. The woman lowered her gaze, offering silent respect. Everyone here was carrying something heavy. Finally, her number was called. For a moment, the hallway noise faded. She stood slowly, smoothing her skirt. The folder felt heavier now. As she stepped forward, a few heads turned. Some looked surprised, others amused. One judge inside the hall glanced at her form before she entered, lips pressing together slightly. She walked toward the door with measured steps. Each step felt like crossing a long bridge. She could sense eyes on her back. Whispers followed, not loud enough to hear clearly, but loud enough to feel. Inside the audition hall, the space opened wide. High ceilings, polished wood, a single grand piano under bright lights. The judges sat behind a long table, papers neatly stacked. Their expressions were neutral, trained, but not unkind. Still, curiosity flickered in their eyes. She bowed her head politely and moved toward the piano bench. The instrument looked beautiful, almost intimidating. She paused, not from fear, but from respect. This was the moment. Not the end, not the beginning. Just a moment, before sitting. She took a quiet breath. The world narrowed to the keys, black and white, waiting. The judges exchanged brief glances. Somewhere behind her, a pen tapped lightly against paper she had not played yet, and already, expectations were low. She sat down, placed her hands gently in her lap, and waited for permission to begin. She sat still on the piano bench, hands resting lightly in her lap. The lights above felt warmer now, closer than they had from the hallway. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Silence stretched, not awkward, just watchful. One of the judges cleared his throat and nodded toward her. That small gesture was all the permission she needed. She adjusted her position slightly, pulling the bench closer with care. Her movements were slow and controlled, not from nervousness, but from habit. Years of playing had taught her to respect the instrument, to settle before touching a single key. She lifted her hands and hovered them over the keyboard. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a judge glance at another, eyebrows raised. Another judge leaned back, arms crossed loosely. They were ready, but not expecting much. Behind the judges, a few observers sat quietly. Some were students, some staff. One young man leaned forward, curious. A woman near the wall looked distracted, flipping through her phone until the room grew quiet again. The plain woman closed her eyes for half a second. In that breath, the noise of the world faded. There was no hall, no judges, no whispers. Only the piano and the story she was about to tell through sound. Her fingers touched the keys. The first notes were soft, almost shy. They floated gently into the room, clear and clean. Nothing flashy, nothing rushed. A simple opening, but steady. The sound carried warmth, like a voice speaking calmly in a crowded space. A judge looked up. She continued, letting the melody unfold naturally. Each note connected smoothly to the next, forming a line that made sense, that felt intentional. There was care in her playing, the kind that came from listening deeply, not just performing. A few seconds passed, then more. The room began to change. The crossed arms slowly uncrossed. A pen stopped tapping. Someone shifted forward in their chair. The music grew stronger, not louder, but fuller. Her hands moved with quiet confidence, traveling across the keyboard without strain. She did not look at the judges. She did not look at the audience. Her eyes stayed on the keys, not staring, just aware. This was not the playing of someone guessing or hoping. This was the playing of someone who knew exactly where the music was going. One judge leaned closer to the table, studying her hands. The other flipped a page on the score in front of him, following along more carefully now. Their expressions had changed from polite attention to focused interest. In the back of the room, the young man straightened, his curiosity turning into surprise. The woman with the phone lowered it slowly, eyes fixed on the piano. The melody deepened. Emotion slipped into the spaces between notes. There was longing there, and patience, and something that felt earned. It was not perfect in a polished way. It was real. She moved into a more complex passage, fingers weaving through the notes with ease. The tempo shifted slightly, just enough to show control. Her hands did not tremble. Her posture remained calm. Years of quiet practice showed in every movement. A judge exchanged a look with another. No words, just a glance that said, "This is not what we expected." The room felt smaller now, drawn inward by the sound. The piano filled the space without force. Each note landed clearly, confidently. Mistakes would have been obvious here, but there were none, only intention. As she played, memories passed through her mind, but they did not distract her. Late nights, cold mornings, a tired body sitting at a piano after long hours of work, moments when she wanted to stop, when she questioned why she kept going. All of it lived inside the music now. One judge adjusted his glasses, eyes narrowing slightly, not in doubt, but in concentration. Another stopped writing entirely, pen resting forgotten on the table. She reached a quieter section, letting the sound soften again. The shift was gentle, controlled. It invited the listener closer instead of pushing them away. The hall seemed to hold its breath. No one coughed. No one moved. This was the point where many players faltered, where nerves showed. But she remained steady. Her breathing stayed slow. Her hands knew this path well. A subtle smile touched the corner of one judge's mouth, quickly hidden. He sat back, then leaned forward again, as if wanting to hear more clearly. The woman did not rush. She allowed the pauses to speak. Silence between notes mattered just as much as the notes themselves. In the hallway outside, faint sounds of movement existed, but they felt distant now. Inside the hall, time seemed to stretch, shaped by the rhythm she controlled. She moved into another demanding passage. Her left hand anchored the sound, strong and reliable, while her right hand carried the melody forward. The balance was precise. Nothing overpowered, nothing lost. A quiet realization settled over the room. They had misjudged her. The plain clothes, the quiet entrance, the lack of confidence on paper, none of it mattered here. Only the sound did, and the sound spoke clearly. A judge leaned toward the microphone, then stopped himself, realizing he did not want to interrupt. He folded his hands instead, eyes fixed on her fingers. Her face remained calm, almost unreadable, but there was life there now, a subtle glow that came from being exactly where she belonged. She reached the final section of the piece. The music rose, not dramatically, but with purpose. It felt like a story nearing its truth. Her hands moved faster now, but never lost clarity. The piano responded to her touch, rich and alive. One observer swallowed hard, unaware they had been holding their breath. As the final notes approached, the room felt charged, as if everyone sensed the ending before it arrived. She slowed slightly, giving the last phrases space to land. Her fingers pressed the final chord. The sound lingered in the air, fading slowly. Gently. She lifted her hands from the keys and rested them in her lap. For a moment, no one moved. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was heavy with understanding. The judges looked at one another, expressions no longer neutral. Something had shifted. The plain woman remained seated, waiting quietly, unaware of how deeply the room had changed. And still, no one spoke. The silence after the last note stayed longer than anyone expected. It was not the kind of pause filled with doubt. It was full, heavy, almost respectful. The sound of the piano still seemed to float in the air, as if it had not yet decided to leave. The woman remained seated, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She did not rush to stand. She had learned that moments like this needed space. Music deserved that much. One judge shifted in his chair, breaking the stillness with a soft creak. Another slowly exhaled, as though only now realizing how tense the room had become. A pen rolled across the table and stopped near the edge, forgotten. The woman lifted her eyes from the keys for the first time and looked toward the judges. Her expression was neutral, polite. She waited. A judge leaned forward slightly. His voice, when he spoke, was measured and careful. He thanked her for her performance. His words were professional, but his eyes told a different story. There was surprise there, and something close to admiration. She nodded once, acknowledging him, still calm. She stood up from the bench, smoothing her skirt the same way she had before sitting down. The movement was simple, unremarkable, yet now it carried weight. As she stepped away from the piano, she felt the shift in the room more clearly. The air felt different, warmer, less distant. She bowed her head slightly and turned toward the exit. Her steps were steady, but inside, something loosened. Not joy, not relief exactly, but release. She had played honestly. Whatever came next was out of her control. When the door closed behind her, the quiet returned, but it did not feel empty anymore. One judge spoke first after she left. His voice was low, thoughtful. He said what the others were already thinking. That was not an ordinary performance. Another judge nodded slowly, flipping through his notes. He admitted he had made assumptions the moment she walked in. He did not say this with shame, just honesty. The third judge remained quiet for a moment longer, then agreed. There was depth in her playing that could not be taught quickly, he said. It came from ears. They sat there, not rushing to call the next contestant. That alone was unusual. Outside in the hallway, the woman stepped into the noise again. Conversations resumed, footsteps echoed, nervous energy buzzed as before. But for her, it felt distant, like sound coming from another room. A few people glanced at her as she walked past. This time, the looks were different, curious, confused. One person whispered something to another, eyebrows raised. Someone else looked at her hands, then quickly looked away. She returned to the seat near the wall and sat down carefully. Her heart still beat faster than normal, but it was slowing now. She placed the folder back on her lap, fingers resting lightly on the cover. A young contestant nearby leaned closer to a friend and murmured something while watching her. There was no laughter this time, no smiles. She stared at the floor for a moment, letting herself breathe. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. She did not replay the performance in her mind. She had learned not to do that. What was done was done. As she sat there, memories returned, not sharply, but softly. She remembered the first piano she ever touched. It had not been hers. It sat in a dusty corner of a community hall, keys uneven, sound slightly out of tune. She had been told not to touch it, but curiosity had pulled her closer. One finger on one key. The sound had surprised her. Something inside her had answered back. She remembered teaching herself when lessons were not possible, listening more than playing, watching hands when others performed, practicing quietly so no one would complain. She remembered being told she was too old to try, too ordinary, too late. Those words had stayed with her for years, sitting heavy in her chest. But they had never stopped her hands. A staff member walked past, calling the next number. Another contestant stood and walked toward the hall, face pale, shoulders stiff. The woman watched with quiet understanding. Time moved slowly again. Minutes passed. She shifted slightly in her seat, easing tension from her back. The folder felt lighter now, as if its purpose had already been fulfilled. She wondered briefly what the judges were saying. Then she let the thought go. Wondering did not change anything. Across the hall, two contestants whispered. One glanced at her again, then looked down quickly when their eyes met. The woman did not react. She had grown used to being talked about without being included. What surprised her was not the attention, but how little it mattered now. The performance had given her something she had not expected: peace. The door to the audition hall opened again. Applause followed, louder this time. The next contestant emerged, smiling with relief. Friends congratulated them quietly. The woman clapped softly too, offering respect. Music deserved that, no matter who played it. As the day went on, she stayed seated, waiting as instructed. Some contestants left early, faces tight with disappointment. Others stayed, hopeful. She watched them all with gentle distance. A judge stepped out briefly and spoke to a staff member near the desk. Their voices were low, serious. The judge glanced in her direction once, then looked away. She noticed. She pretended not to. Her hands rested in her lap. Fingers relaxed now, no longer tense. These were hands shaped by work and time, not just music. Small marks, faint lines. Honest hands. She thought about going home later, about the familiar walk back to her small place, about making a simple meal, about sitting by the window as evening came. Whether she passed or not, life would continue. She would still play. That was the quiet truth she carried. Another number was called. Another door opened and closed. Then, a staff member approached her. The woman looked up, meeting the staff member's eyes calmly. There was a brief pause, the kind that made the heart lift and sink at the same time. The staff member asked her politely to wait a little longer, that the judges might wish to speak with her later. She nodded once, thanking them quietly. As the staff member walked away, a few nearby contestants stared openly now. Whispers spread again, but they sounded different, less sharp, more uncertain. She sat back against the wall, folding her hands together. Her heart beat a little faster again, but she welcomed it. Something was changing, not loudly, not suddenly, but surely. She remained seated against the wall, the sounds of the hallway flowing around her like water round a stone. People moved, talked, waited, hoped. Time passed in uneven pieces. Sometimes it rushed, sometimes it slowed until each second felt heavy. She watched as more contestants were called, one by one. Some returned smiling, others quiet and pale. Each face carried a story she did not know. She felt connected to them all in a quiet way. Everyone here had stepped forward with something fragile. Her thoughts drifted, not far, just enough to rest. She thought about the many times she had almost given up. The mornings when her hands felt stiff from work. The nights when practice felt pointless. There had been long stretches when no one listened, when music lived only between her and the keys. Those years had shaped her more than applause ever could. A soft sound pulled her back to the present. The door to the audition hall opened again. The same judge stepped out, scanning the hallway. When his eyes found her, he paused. He called her number. The sound of it made the hallway feel suddenly small. Conversation stopped. A few heads turned. Someone nearby inhaled sharply. She stood up slowly, the same way she had before, smoothing her skirt. Her heart beat faster now, louder in her ears. But her steps stayed steady. She followed the judge back toward the hall. As she walked, she felt the weight of the moment pressing gently on her shoulders. Not heavy enough to crush her, just enough to remind her that something important was happening. Inside the hall, the lights felt less harsh this time. The piano sat where it had been before, silent and patient. The judges were seated, their posture different now, more open, less distant. She stood where she was directed, hands folded loosely in front of her. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one judge smiled slightly and thanked her again for her performance. He said they would like to ask her a few questions. She nodded, listening carefully. They asked about her background, where she had studied, who had taught her. The questions were gentle, curious, not challenging. She answered honestly. She spoke about learning on her own, about borrowed pianos and quiet practice. She did not dramatize it. She did not apologize for it either. It was simply her story. As she spoke, she noticed the way the judges listened, truly listened. One leaned forward, another nodded slowly. The third rested his hands together, thoughtful. One of them asked how long she had been playing. She paused before answering, calculating years in her mind. Then she gave a simple number. It was larger than they expected. Their expressions shifted again, something like understanding settling in. Another judge asked why she decided to audition now. She considered the question carefully. Then she said the truth, that she had spent a long time believing it was too late, that one day she realized the music had never left her, and that regret would hurt more than rejection. The room was quiet after that. The judge who had spoken first cleared his throat and thanked her for her honesty. He said it was clear she had something rare, not just skill, but depth. She lowered her eyes briefly, not in embarrassment, but humility. They asked her to sit and play again. This time, there was no assumption in the air, no doubt, only attention. She returned to the piano bench, adjusting it carefully. She placed her hands on the keys and began another piece, different from the first, slower, more reflective. The sound filled the hall again, softer this time, but just as strong. The music felt like a conversation rather than a performance. Each note carried patience and understanding. The judges listened without interruption. No writing, no whispering, just listening. She played as if she were alone, yet fully present. The years of quiet practice flowed through her hands naturally. When she finished, the silence returned, familiar and full. One judge spoke quietly, almost to himself, saying that some musicians spent a lifetime chasing that kind of expression. Another nodded, saying it could not be taught easily. They thanked her once more and asked her to wait outside while they discussed. She stood, bowed her head politely, and left the hall. Back in the hallway, the air felt thicker. People watched her openly now. Some smiled uncertainly, others looked away. She returned to her seat and sat down slowly. Her hands trembled slightly now that the music had stopped. She folded them together, steadying herself. Waiting was harder this time. Minutes stretched. Conversations resumed, but she barely heard them. Her thoughts stayed close, circling quietly. She reminded herself again that she had done what she came to do. A staff member approached and told her the judges would announce decisions later in the day. She thanked them and nodded. As time passed, the hallway slowly emptied. Contestants left in small groups or alone. The light through the windows shifted toward afternoon. She stayed. Eventually, the door to the hall opened again. The judges stepped out together. Their faces were serious, but calm. One of them called several numbers. Some people reacted with smiles, others with disappointment. Then he called her number. Her breath caught. Just for a moment, she stood. The judge informed her that she had been selected to move forward, that her performance had left a strong impression, that they believed she had something special to offer. The words settled slowly. She nodded, thanking them quietly. Her voice was steady. though her chest felt full. As she gathered her folder and prepared to leave, the hallway felt different once more. Lighter, warmer. She walked toward the exit with calm steps, the same way she had entered, but inside, something had changed. For the first time in a long while, the future felt open. She stepped outside the building and paused near the entrance. The air felt cooler than inside, fresh against her face. Afternoon light rested gently on the steps, soft and calm. For a moment, she simply stood there, letting everything settle. People passed by, some laughing, some talking on phones, others lost in their own thoughts. No one here knew what had just happened inside, and that was fine. The moment felt private, almost sacred. She took a slow breath and began walking down the steps. Each step felt lighter than the one before, not because her life had suddenly changed, but because something inside her had finally loosened its grip. She thought back to the morning, to the way she had stood quietly in the hallway, unseen and judged before a single note was played. The memory no longer hurt. It felt distant now, like an old story she had outgrown. As she walked toward the bus stop, she replayed the music in her mind, not to search for mistakes, but to remember the feeling, the connection, the truth she had allowed herself to share. The bus arrived with a low rumble, doors opening slowly. She stepped inside and took a seat by the window. The city moved past her as the bus pulled away. Buildings, streets, faces. Life continued as it always did. She rested her hands on her lap, watching them as the bus swayed gently. These hands had carried more than music. They had worked long hours, carried heavy bags, cleaned, lifted, endured, and still, they had made music. She smiled faintly at that thought. At home, her place welcomed her with quiet familiarity. A small room, simple furniture, nothing fancy. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains. Everything was just as she had left it. She placed her folder on the table and removed her shoes. For a moment, she stood there, unsure what to do next. Then she moved toward the piano in the corner of the room. It was old. The finish was worn. A few keys showed their age, but it was hers. She sat down and played softly, not practicing, not performing, just playing, letting her hands move without direction. The music filled the room gently, wrapping around the walls. It felt like coming home. She thought about the judge's words, about being seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long while. It mattered, but what mattered more was knowing she had not betrayed herself by staying silent. Even if nothing more came from this, she had already gained something important. Days passed. A letter arrived in the mail, simple and official. She opened it slowly, hands steady. The words inside confirmed what she had been told. An invitation to continue. Opportunities she had once believed were not meant for people like her. She sat with the letter for a long time, letting the reality sink in. Fear crept in, quiet but present. So did doubt, but they did not control her. She remembered the hallway, the looks, the silence before the first note. She remembered how the room had changed. That memory gave her strength. She continued her routine. Work, practice, rest. Nothing dramatic changed overnight, but something subtle shifted in how she moved through the world. Her shoulders were less tense, her steps more certain. At rehearsals and meetings, people listened when she spoke, some with curiosity, some with respect. She noticed it, but did not cling to it. Music remained her anchor. One evening, she returned to the conservatory for the next stage. The building looked the same, but it felt different now. She walked in with the same quiet presence, but without the weight she once carried. Some people recognized her. A few nodded politely. Others watched her with interest. She sat at another piano under different lights, played again and again. Each time, she played with honesty, not trying to impress, not trying to prove anything. She understood now that her value had never depended on approval. It had always lived in the work, the dedication, the love for sound and silence. Weeks turned into months. Her story traveled quietly, not as a headline, not as a sensation, but as a reminder whispered between students, shared among teachers. There was talk about the woman who walked in unnoticed and played like she had lived inside the music her whole life. She heard some of it. She ignored most of it. At home, her piano remained her truest audience. Sometimes she thought about all the people who never get the chance to be heard, those who stop trying because they are told it is too late or not enough. She wished they could have been in that room. One afternoon, she volunteered to play at a small community event. No stage lights, no judges, just people sitting close together, listening. When she finished, an older woman took her hand and said the music reminded her of her younger days. A child sat on the floor nearby, eyes wide, listening closely. That moment meant as much as any audition. She realized then that success was not about doors opening. It was about staying open herself. Late one night, she sat by her window, city lights glowing softly outside. She thought about the word ridicule, how easily it had once wounded her, how powerless it felt now. She had not changed the world, but she had changed her place in it, and that was enough. When she returned to the piano, she played with the same quiet strength she always had, only now, she played without fear.